I want to ask you something. Before this story begins, think of the hardest starting point you can imagine. No money. No connection. No one ahead of you who looked like you and made it to the other side. A roof that leaked when it rained. A stomach that knew hunger. Not as a word, but as a physical companion that arrived every evening and stayed through the night. Now ask yourself honestly, if that had been your beginning, would you have refused it? Not accepted it quietly. Not survived it barely. Refused it. That is what Kofi did. And I want to tell you his story. Not because it is comfortable. Not because it is easy. But because somewhere in it is something I think you need to hear. Stay with me until the end. Kofi was born in a village so small it did not appear on any map that mattered to the people who made maps. It sat at the end of a red dust road that the rains turned to mud every season, and the sun turned back to dust when they left. There were no permanent buildings except the chief's house and the small structure at the edge of the village that served as a school 3 days a week. When the teacher came, Kofi's father had died before Kofi was old enough to remember his face. His mother, Akosia, was a woman built from something harder than circumstance. She washed clothes for 3 families in the village, carried water from the river every morning before the sun came fully up, and grew a small garden behind their one-room house that produced just enough to keep both of them on the right side of alive. She was not educated. She could not read the letters that sometimes came from the government office in the town, but she understood one thing with the clarity of someone who has had everything taken and is still standing. The only door out of this life was the one her son would have to build himself. She told him this the first night he came home from school crying because the other children had laughed at his feet. He had no shoes. She sat him down. She took his feet in her hands. She said, "These feet carried you to school today. They will carry you further than anyone in this village has ever gone. But only if you decide tonight that you will not stop walking." Kofi was 7 years old. He decided. Growing up with nothing is not a simple thing to describe to someone who has not lived it. It is not just the absence of money. It is the presence of shame. The specific kind that arrives when you are young enough to feel everything and old enough to understand what the feeling means. It is sitting in a classroom with a borrowed pencil and no exercise book and writing your lessons on the back of paper that has already been used. It is watching other children carry food to school and learning to make your hunger invisible. Learning to keep your face still during the hours when your body is loudest. It is being called aside by a teacher after class, not for praise, but because your school fees have not been paid for the 3rd month in a row, and the school cannot continue to carry you. Kofi knew all of these things before he was 10 years old. But here is what nobody tells you about growing up with nothing. Nothing is also a teacher. It teaches you how to want something so specifically, so concretely, so without the vagueness That comes with comfort. That the wanting itself becomes a kind of fuel that children with enough simply do not have. Kofi wanted his way out. The way a man trapped underground wants air. Not abstractly. Physically. In his chest. Every single morning. When Kofi was 11, a new teacher arrived in the village. His name was Mr. Asante. He was young. 24 years old. Freshly trained. Sent to the village. As his first posting, he arrived with more books than the school had ever had, and the specific energy of someone who still believed that a good teacher could change the direction of a life. He was right. He just did not know yet whose life he was about to change. Within 2 weeks, Mr. Asante had noticed Kofi. Not because Kofi was loud. Because Kofi was hungry. Not for food, though that too, but for everything Mr. Asante put in front of the class. He absorbed it the way dry earth absorbs the first rain of the season. Completely. Immediately. As if it had always been waiting. Mr. Asante began staying after school. With Kofi. 1 hour. Then 2. Sometimes 3. Until the light left. And the village began its evening sounds. He gave Kofi books. From his own small collection. Kofi read them by firelight. After his mother had slept. One evening Mr. Asante said to him, "Kofi, do you know what you are capable of?" Kofi shook his head honestly. Mr. Asante said, "Neither do I yet. But I know it is more than this village has ever seen. And I am going to make sure you know how to reach it." What happened over the next 4 years is the part of this story that I think about most often. Because it was not a miracle. It was not luck. It was not the arrival of something from outside Kofi's life that changed everything. It was something much harder and much more honest than any of those things. Stay with me. Kofi worked. That is the only word for it. That is honest enough. He woke before his mother. He studied before school. He studied after school. He studied on the days he was hungry. And on the days he was tired. And on the nights the roof leaked. And the rain came in. And he had to move his books to the one dry corner of the room. And sit there, wrapped in the only blanket they had. And keep reading. He sat examinations that children in the town spent months preparing for, with tutors and textbooks, and quiet rooms. Kofi prepared in firelight, with borrowed books, and a hunger that had no name, except refusal. Refusal to stay. Refusal to accept that the red dust road was the beginning and the end of his story. Refusal to let what he had been given be the final word on what he could become. When the examination results came, Mr. Asante read them first. He came to find Kofi in the field where he was helping his mother. He said nothing at first. He just held out the paper. Kofi read it. He read it again. He had placed first in the entire district. Not just the village. Not just the school. But the entire district of children who had studied in proper buildings, with proper resources, and proper meals. Every single day, he stood in the field with that paper in his hand. For a long time, his mother came and stood beside him. She looked at the paper. She could not read the words, but she read his face. And she did what she had not done In as long as Kofi could remember. She wept. Not from sadness. From the specific relief of a woman who had carried a hope so privately, so carefully, for so long, that finally having it confirmed was almost more than the body could quietly hold. A scholarship came. Not easily. Nothing about Kofi's life came easily. There were forms to fill that required help to read. There were journeys to the town, on roads Kofi had never walked. There were people behind desks who looked at a boy from a village that did not appear on any map that mattered, and asked questions with their eyes that they were too polite to ask with their mouths. Kofi answered every question. He filled every form. He made every journey. He arrived at the secondary school in the city with one change of clothes, a small bag of his mother's garden food that she had packed the night before without sleeping, and the paper with his examination results folded carefully in his pocket. The one thing he owned that nobody could take from him, because it was made entirely from what was inside him. On the first day, a boy from the city looked at Kofi's bag and laughed. Kofi looked at him for a long, quiet moment. Then he went to his desk and opened his book. He had not come this far to be stopped by a laugh. Kofi is a man now. He went further than the city school, further than anyone. From that village, on that red dust road, had gone before him. He went back, not to show anyone anything, not to prove a point to the children who laughed, or the teachers who almost gave up, or the system that almost lost him. He went back because his mother was still there, still growing things in the small garden behind the one-room house, still carrying water from the river. Every morning, he built her a house, not large, not grand, just solid, with a roof that did not leak, and walls that kept the cold out, and a small veranda where she could sit in the evening and watch the village the way she had always watched it, with the patience of someone who always knew it would come right in the end. She sat on that veranda on the first evening it was finished, and said nothing for a long time. Then she said, "I told you those feet would carry you further than anyone in this village had gone." Kofi sat beside her. He thought about the borrowed pencil, the leaked roof, the hunger that stayed through the night, the firelight and the books, Mr. Asante holding out that paper in a field. He thought about all the mornings he had woken up and chosen, again, to refuse. Here is what Kofi's story is really about. It is not about intelligence. Many intelligent children stayed on that red dust road. It is not about luck. Luck did not find Kofi. Kofi worked until luck had no choice but to notice him. It is about the decision made in the dark, when nobody is watching, and nothing is guaranteed, and every reasonable voice around you is saying, "This is as far as you go." And you look at those voices quietly, without anger, without drama, and you refuse. You were not born into nothing. You were born into a beginning that most people would not have survived. The question is not what you were given. The question is what you will do with the refusal that is already inside you. Because it is there. It has always been there. Kofi simply decided to listen to it. That was a story from Tales for Thought. If Kofi's story stayed with you, if there is something in your own life that you have been accepting when you should be refusing, subscribe to Tales for Thought. Every week I sit down and tell one honest story about a real human decision and what it quietly cost or built. The next story is already waiting for you.